I still remember the morning it happened. The air was still cold, the kind that seeps into your bones even when the sun is shining. I walked into my office, the one I had built from nothing but borrowed hope and a second-hand lathe machine, and found my daughters sitting around the long oak table I had once polished myself. Linda, my eldest, sat straight, her fingers clasped around a pen like she was holding authority in her hand. Emily and Claire, my younger ones, kept glancing at each other. My wife, Margaret, stood behind them, silent, distant, eyes not meeting mine. "Dad," Linda began, her voice rehearsed, polite, but sharp enough to slice the years between us. "We've been talking, and we think it's time you stepped away from the company." I blinked. "Stepped away?" I repeated softly, as though I'd misheard her. She nodded, firm. "You've done a lot, and we're grateful. But the business world has changed. We need a younger perspective, fresh leadership." Fresh leadership. That's what they called it. I'd called it betrayal. Margaret didn't say a word. She just looked at the table, the same table where we had celebrated our first big contract 20 years ago. I remembered that day, champagne spilling, sawdust on my sleeves, my girls clapping as I lifted them one by one, promising that one day the company would be theirs. And here we were. They were taking it, but not the way I had imagined. I didn't argue. I didn't ask why now, or what did I do wrong. I simply smiled. A quiet, measured smile that came not from peace, but from understanding. They had been planning this for months. I could see it in their eyes, that uneasy confidence people get when they believe they're right, even when they know they're being cruel. Linda continued, "You'll still receive your share, of course. We'll make sure you're taken care of. You deserve to rest, Dad." Rest. That word sat heavy in my chest. As if my hands had stopped working, as if my mind had gone dull. I had built Harrison Woodworks from my garage. From one table to hundreds of designs shipped across the state. And now my own daughters were telling me to rest. I stood there quietly. Looked at each of them, my daughters, my pride. My wife, my companion through 40 years of struggle. "All right," I said simply. "If that's what you think is best." They seemed relieved, almost surprised that I didn't resist. Linda gave a small smile, trying to sound grateful. "We knew you'd understand." I nodded and walked out of the office, my step steady but hollow. I could still smell the varnish, the pine, the scent of my life's work. When I got home that evening, the silence felt heavier than ever. Margaret was there, sitting by the kitchen window. She didn't look up. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat across from her. "So," I said quietly, "you agreed with them." She hesitated. "They just want to move forward, John. They think you've been too traditional." I let out a soft breath, half a laugh, half a sigh. Traditional built this house. Traditional fed them through college. "I know," she said. "But times are changing." I looked at her for a long moment. "Then I suppose I'll have to change too." That night, I didn't sleep much. My mind kept replaying their words. "Step away." It echoed like a hammer hitting wood. But underneath the sting, a quiet thought began to form, not revenge, not anger. Just clarity. If they wanted me gone, then I'd go. But I wouldn't disappear. I'd build again. Only this time, I'd do it differently. I'd show them what they'd thrown away, not through arguments or tears, but through creation. Through success. Through patience. Because I learned long ago, the sweetest revenge isn't destroying what hurt you. It's showing that you never needed it to survive. When I handed over my office keys a week later, the building felt colder than I remembered. It wasn't just the draft sneaking through the factory doors, it was the emptiness of being unwanted in a place I had built from scratch. The workers tried not to look at me. Some nodded awkwardly, unsure what to say. They had seen me covered in sawdust, bleeding from splinters, laughing over broken machines that I'd fixed myself. But now, I was just Mr. Harrison retired. The title didn't fit. Retirement sounded like a word for people who wanted to stop. I didn't want to stop, I just wanted to start again. I packed my few belongings from the office, the framed photo of my daughters when they were little, the first set of design sketches I ever drew, and a worn wooden ruler that had belonged to my father. He was a carpenter before me. I remembered his rough hands guiding mine when I was a boy, showing me how to measure not just with a ruler, but with patience. Wood doesn't rush, he used to say. You cut it slow, or you'll regret it later. That advice echoed now in a different way. I had been cut out fast, clean, no hesitation from them. But I wouldn't make the same mistake. My next move would be slow, deliberate, and silent. For a few weeks, I stayed home. Margaret tried to be kind, making tea, asking if I wanted to visit old friends. But there was a distance between us, one made not of anger, but of quiet disappointment. She thought she'd done the right thing siding with the girls, and I didn't blame her. Maybe she thought she was protecting them, or maybe she was tired of the endless discussions about growth and modernization. Still, I could feel something stirring inside me. It wasn't revenge in the burning sense, it was something colder, steadier. A kind of calm purpose. One afternoon, I drove to the old district where I had started my first workshop 40 years ago. The building was still there, a small brick structure with a faded sign that barely read Harrison's Woodcraft. The windows were dusty, and the roof sagged a little, but when I stepped inside, I smelled something familiar, that deep, dry scent of aged wood. Memories flooded back, long nights sanding oak tables, teaching my apprentices how to listen to the grain, not fight it. I ran my hand over an old bench and felt that same rough surface beneath my fingers. It grounded me. That's when I knew what I had to do. Not rebuild the old company, that name was gone, owned by my daughters now. But build something new, smaller, quieter, yet sharper. Something that would remind the market, and my family, where true craftsmanship came from. I rented the old space that same week. The landlord, an old friend named Frank, gave me a long look. "Starting again, John?" he asked with a half-smile. "Not starting," I said. "Just continuing." He laughed softly. "Well, if anyone can turn dust into gold again, it's you." I began small. One table saw. One workbench. My own 2 hands. I didn't have a fancy logo or office chairs or digital marketing plans like my daughters insisted on. I had wood tools and decades of quiet skill. At first, I made just a few pieces, handcrafted chairs, custom tables. I posted pictures online under a new name, Old Maple Designs. It sounded gentle, timeless. Nothing flashy. To my surprise, people noticed. They said my furniture had soul, that it reminded them of real quality. Orders started coming in from small stores and private clients who wanted authentic craftsmanship, not mass-produced pieces made by machines. Every evening, I'd wipe the dust off my hands and sit outside the shop, sipping coffee, watching the sun go down behind the old trees. I didn't tell anyone about my progress, not Margaret, not the girls. Let silence be my ally. A few months passed. Then, one evening, I saw an online article about Harrison Woodworks, now run by my daughters. The headline read, "Local furniture brand expands, but quality concerns rise." I clicked it, heart steady but curious. The article mentioned customer complaints about delays, inconsistent designs, and poor material quality. The company was chasing big corporate contracts, mass-producing pieces that looked good in catalogs but didn't last long in homes. I closed my laptop quietly. No satisfaction, no gloating, just a deep, inevitable truth. When you replace passion with profit, the wood cracks from within. Around that time, Margaret began to notice something different in me. "You've been going out early lately," she said one morning. "Where do you go?" I smiled softly. "Just keeping myself busy." She tilted her head. "You look happier." "Maybe I am," I said. "It's strange. Losing everything can sometimes make space for something better." She gave me a puzzled look but didn't ask more. I think part of her was afraid of the answer. One weekend, an old client named Robert came by the shop. He was a restaurant owner who'd once ordered custom tables from me years ago. "I heard you're back at it," he said, looking around my modest space. "You wouldn't believe how many people ask me where I got your work. You've still got that touch, John." I chuckled. "Guess some things don't retire." He smiled. "Listen, I'm opening a new restaurant in the city. I want your pieces in it. All of them. I'll pay whatever it takes." It was the first big order since I restarted. I spent weeks designing the furniture, every joint, every curve, every finish. It reminded me of the early days, when work wasn't about balance sheets or investors, but about creating something beautiful that lasted. When the restaurant opened, local magazines featured it. They mentioned the furniture, handcrafted by a veteran craftsman named John Harrison from Old Maple Designs. Business grew faster than I expected. People wanted authenticity again, something their hearts could trust. I didn't advertise much. I just worked, quietly, consistently. Every piece that left my shop carried a small engraving under the surface, "Made in patience." And so, while Harrison Woodworks expanded with investors and showrooms, Old Maple Designs grew quietly through reputation and word of mouth. I never bragged. I never told my daughters. I wanted time to do the talking for me. Because wood, like truth, always reveals itself with time. The first signs of change began quietly, almost too quietly. One morning, I received an email from a furniture magazine editor asking for an interview. They'd seen my work in Robert's restaurant and wanted to feature Old Maple Designs in their Masters of Craft series. I almost declined. I didn't want attention. But then I thought, perhaps the world should be reminded that craftsmanship doesn't vanish with age. So, I agreed. When the article was published a month later, it spread further than I expected. It wasn't flashy or sensational. It was a simple story about a man who had returned to his roots after being pushed out of his own legacy. That phrase caught people's attention. They didn't know the full story, but they felt the truth behind it. Orders started flooding in. Small stores wanted my tables. Interior designers called, asking for custom commissions. I hired 2 apprentices, young men eager to learn the old ways. One afternoon, while sanding a walnut chair, one of them, Daniel, said, "Mr. Harrison, I read that article about you. Is it true you used to run a big company?" I smiled softly. "Used to, yes. But a company is just a name. What matters is what you keep inside your hands." He nodded slowly, like he was trying to understand more than I was saying. Meanwhile, the storm was brewing on the other side. My daughter's company, Harrison Woodworks, had started losing major contracts. Their mass production model had backfired. The machines were efficient but soulless. Clients complained that the furniture lacked warmth, lacked identity. Linda, my eldest, tried to pivot the business. She hired consultants, changed designs, launched expensive marketing campaigns. But all that polish couldn't hide the cracks in the wood, or in their leadership. I didn't gloat. But deep down, I knew this was life showing its quiet balance. They had chosen speed over substance, and now they were paying for it. Margaret, however, noticed the tension. "Linda seems stressed lately," she said one evening at dinner. "She says business is slowing down. Have you heard?" I kept my voice even. "I've heard a little. The market's changing." She sighed. "I worry about them." "So do I," I said gently. "But maybe they need to learn that the world doesn't bend for shortcuts." Weeks later, something unexpected happened. I received an order inquiry from Harrison Woodworks. It was formal, professional, sent through their purchasing department. They wanted to outsource a batch of high-end handcrafted pieces for a new premium line. At first, I thought it was a mistake. But when I checked the email signature, it was real. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen, half in disbelief, half in quiet amusement. My own company, the one that pushed me out, was now reaching out to my workshop for quality they could no longer create. I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I went for a walk. The evening air was cool, and the world felt unusually still. I remembered my father's words again: wood doesn't rush. Neither would I. That night, I wrote a calm, simple response. Thank you for your inquiry. Old Maple Designs is open to collaboration, but we maintain full control over our designs and craftsmanship. Quality cannot be outsourced, it must be shared in spirit. It wasn't a rejection, but it wasn't an easy yes either. I wanted them to feel the weight of what they were asking for. 2 days later, I received a call. It was Linda. Her voice was formal at first, then softened. Dad. I didn't realize Old Maple Designs was you. I smiled quietly into the receiver. Most people didn't. There was a long pause. Your work is incredible, she said finally. People can't stop talking about it. Thank you, I said simply. It's just furniture. But I suppose it speaks differently when made with care. Maybe we could collaborate, she offered. We could combine our reach with your craftsmanship. It could help both of us. I could hear the uncertainty in her voice, pride fighting humility. I'll think about it, I replied. But remember, Linda, the foundation of a house is only as strong as the wood beneath it. I understand, she said quietly. And Dad, I'm sorry for how things ended before. Don't be sorry, I said gently. You were doing what you thought was best. I was too. After the call, I sat in my workshop for a long while. I didn't feel triumph, just a strange, peaceful ache. The kind you get when the world starts turning back toward truth. In the following months, Old Maple Designs continued to grow. My 2 apprentices became skilled craftsmen. We began getting offers from boutique hotels and designers across the state. People loved the authenticity, the human touch. One afternoon, Daniel showed me a post online. It was from Harrison Woodworks' official account. They had announced a partnership with Old Maple Designs. I hadn't even signed the contract yet, but apparently Linda wanted to show the world she was making moves to restore quality. I didn't mind. Let her have her headlines. I had the substance. Still, I decided to meet with her in person to discuss terms. When I walked into the boardroom again, months after being asked to leave, the air felt different. The same oak table stood there, but now the polish was worn, the edges dull. My daughters looked tired, overworked, anxious, maybe even humbled. Linda stood up first. Dad, she said softly. Thank you for coming. I smiled. It's just business, remember? Emily and Claire exchanged guilty glances. They didn't know what to say. Linda handed me the draft contract. I skimmed it quietly: corporate language, profit sharing, design rights. All neat, logical, and detached. Then I set the paper down. If we're doing this, I said calmly, we'll do it my way. No shortcuts, no cheap materials, no production quotas. Real wood, real hands, real time. Linda nodded, almost too quickly. Of course. And one more thing, I added. The designs will carry both names, Harrison and Maple Collection. Equal credit. For a moment, I thought she'd refuse. But instead, she looked at me with eyes that had finally learned humility. You have a deal. When I left the building that day, the wind felt lighter. Not because I'd won, but because I no longer needed to. The revenge had already happened, silently, through patience and purpose. They had taken my company once. Now they were asking me to help rebuild it. The collaboration began slowly, cautiously. At first, it felt strange walking back into the factory under the same roof that had once rejected me. I could still remember the sting of that meeting when they'd asked me to step away. But now, the air was different. The pride that had once filled the place had turned into something quieter, almost regretful. Linda had given me a small workspace in the back corner of the main production area. I didn't mind, I preferred it that way. I wasn't there to reclaim a throne. I was there to create something lasting. The new Harrison and Maple collection began with 6 pieces: a dining table, a rocking chair, a pair of nightstands, a writing desk, and a handcrafted wardrobe. Each one was designed the way I always believed furniture should be made, with patience, with feeling, with hands that understood wood like an old friend. I worked alongside my apprentices, Daniel and Rick, and even a few of Harrison Woodworks' younger employees started spending time with us, watching, learning. They were curious, drawn not to machines, but to craft. One of them, a young designer named Megan, told me one day, "Mr. Harrison, when you shape wood, it looks like you're talking to it." I smiled. In a way, I am. Wood remembers every touch. Treat it right, and it gives back beauty. Treat it wrong, and it resists you. She nodded slowly, as if realizing that the same truth applied to more than just furniture. Over the next few months, the Harrison and Maple collection became the company's quiet revival. The pieces started gaining attention online. Customers posted photos, praising the warmth and craftsmanship, saying the furniture felt alive, told stories, belonged to homes, not showrooms. Sales began climbing again. But more than that, respect returned, from clients, from designers, even from within the company. People started talking about quality again instead of targets. I could see the change in Linda too. Her tone softened, her pace slowed. She spent more time in the workshop than in the boardroom. Sometimes, she'd just stand there watching us work, eyes filled with thought. One evening, as I was cleaning up, she approached me quietly. "Dad," she said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Were you angry when we pushed you out?" I paused for a moment. Anger doesn't build, Linda. It only burns. I was hurt, yes. But hurt can be turned into something useful, if you stay still long enough to understand it. She looked down, her voice trembling slightly. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought modernization meant progress. But I lost sight of what mattered. I placed a hand on her shoulder. "You made a mistake. So did I once, when I believed I was the only one who could lead. Maybe we both needed time to grow." She looked at me then, eyes full of both guilt and gratitude. "Thank you for coming back." I smiled faintly. I never left, not really. My name might have been off the door, but my work was always in the wood. As months turned into a year, Harrison Woodworks regained its reputation. But this time, it wasn't built on expansion or flashy branding. It was built on truth, the quiet kind that lives inside good work and honest effort. The Harrison and Maple collection was now sold across the country. Magazines called it a perfect blend of legacy and renewal. Designers praised it as a return to the roots of American craftsmanship. But the biggest reward wasn't the recognition. It was watching my daughters rediscover what our family business was really about. Emily, once obsessed with corporate growth, started designing smaller collections focused on sustainable materials. Claire, who had managed the marketing department, began telling the real story of our heritage in her campaigns. The story of a father who built with hands, not machines. They were learning, not through lectures, but through quiet example. One weekend, Linda invited me and Margaret over for dinner at her house. It was the first time we'd all sat together like a family in over a year. When I arrived, I noticed something familiar: the dining table she was serving on. It was one of mine. "I found it in storage," she said when she caught me looking at it. "You made it back when I was in college. I kept it all these years. I guess I didn't realize what it meant until now." I ran my hand over the smooth surface. "You kept it well." She smiled softly. "It's stronger than it looks." We sat down, and for the first time in a long time, laughter filled the room again. Not forced, not polite, real, unguarded laughter. At one point, Emily raised her glass. "To Dad, the man who taught us that silence can speak louder than anger." Margaret smiled warmly, her eyes glistening. "And to forgiveness," she said quietly. I didn't need to say anything. The moment spoke for itself. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a rhythm I hadn't known I'd missed. I spent mornings at the workshop, afternoons teaching the younger craftsmen, and evenings at home, where Margaret and I shared the kind of peace that comes only after surviving storms. Sometimes, she'd look at me with quiet pride.
"You were right, John.
Time took care of everything."
I'd smile.
Time, and a bit of patience. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just patience, it was purpose. The kind that doesn't shout, doesn't fight, doesn't chase. It simply endures. A few months later, Harrison Woodworks was invited to a national design fair, a big moment for the company. Linda asked if I would attend with them. "Only if you want me there," I said. "Dad," she replied, her voice soft but steady, "it wouldn't be right without you." At the fair, I stood beside my daughters, surrounded by our furniture. Not just wooden polish, but pieces of our story. Every table, every chair carried the weight of our past and the promise of what we'd become. As people walked by, admiring the craftsmanship, I realized something profound. Revenge had never been the goal. Restoration was. And it had happened, not through confrontation, but through creation. Linda turned to me as the crowd thinned. "You know," she said quietly, "you didn't need to prove anything. We see it now. We were wrong." I looked at her gently. "You weren't wrong. You were just young. You wanted to build faster, I wanted to build better. We both learned what lasts longer." She smiled through tears. "And what does last longer?" I glanced at the tables, at the craftsmanship glowing under soft lights. The things made with care. And love. Always. That night, as we packed up the display, I noticed a small boy watching us from across the hall, his eyes fixed on the furniture, the way I once looked at my father's workbench. I walked over, knelt beside him, and said, "Do you like woodwork, son?" He nodded shyly. "It's beautiful. It looks alive." I smiled. "That's because it's made by people who believe in second chances." When everything settled, there was a strange quiet in my life. The kind of quiet that comes after a long storm. The kind that makes you hear your own thoughts again. The factory now ran under new leadership, mine. The same building, the same tools, the same smell of polished oak and varnish, but the air felt different. People smiled again. The laughter of the workers returned, and the hum of saws no longer carried tension. I often walked through the aisles early in the morning, before anyone arrived. I'd run my fingers over the edge of a newly finished table and think, this is what we built our lives around. It was never just about money. It was about pride, craftsmanship, legacy. And yet, that legacy had almost been destroyed by my own family. When I took full control back, I didn't celebrate. There were no announcements, no grand speeches. I simply got back to work. Linda stayed quiet for weeks after the board's decision. She still lived in the same house, though we slept in separate rooms. Sometimes, we'd cross paths in the kitchen, and she'd look at me with eyes that said more than words could. One morning, she finally spoke. "David," she said softly, "I didn't mean for it to go that far. I just thought you needed rest." The girls thought they were helping. I looked at her, calm and steady. "I know," I replied. "You were all trying to protect something you didn't understand. You thought the company was the problem, but it was never that. The problem was that we stopped listening to each other." She nodded, tears quietly filling her eyes. "I should have trusted you," she whispered. I smiled gently. "And I should have prepared them better. Maybe I made it too easy for them to forget how much heart this business needed." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was the beginning of understanding. The girls took longer. At first, they avoided me entirely. But over time, they started showing up again, sometimes with small excuses. "Dad, can we use the office printer? Do you still have those old sketches of the first oak dining set?" Small, almost meaningless questions. But I knew what they meant. They were finding their way back. Then one day Emily, the eldest, came to see me in my office. She stood there, her hands folded in front of her, looking at the old photos on the wall. Pictures of me, her grandfather, and even her as a child sitting on a half-finished chair in the workshop.
I was wrong, she said finally. We all were.
We thought you were being stubborn. But you were just protecting what you built.
I nodded slowly. I wasn't perfect, Emily.
I made mistakes too. But I wanted you three to understand something. Leadership isn't just about taking control. It's about carrying the weight, even when it hurts. She sat down across from me. We understand that now. We talked for hours that day. About business, family, and legacy. And though nothing could erase the pain of betrayal, I could feel something healing, something small but real.
Years passed.
The company grew again, quietly but surely. We modernized without losing our soul. We opened new showrooms, hired fresh designers, and introduced sustainable wood lines, a balance between tradition and progress. I eventually stepped back, on my own terms this time. I didn't step away out of pressure or betrayal, but because I had taught everything I could. I watched as my daughters, now wiser and more grounded, took the company forward with humility.
And Linda, she found peace too.
We rebuilt something between us, not quite the same as before, but gentler. There were still scars, but they no longer hurt to touch. Sometimes, she'd come to the factory just to see the new designs. She'd run her hand across the polished walnut and smile faintly. You were right about staying close to it, she'd say. It's more than just furniture. And I'd smile back, quietly thinking, it always was. Looking back now, I realize revenge was never really the point. I didn't destroy them, I didn't expose them, I simply let truth reveal itself. I let time and patience do what anger never could. They learned through their own fall. And when they came back, they came with humility, not pride. I think that's what real justice looks like, not seeing others suffer, but watching wisdom grow from the ashes of arrogance. And yes, there were nights when loneliness sat beside me like an old friend. Nights when I'd wonder how things could have been different if I'd just fought harder or shouted louder. But then I'd remember, shouting never built anything. Silence, patience, and clarity did. Once, a young craftsman in the factory asked me, Mr. Walker, after everything that happened, how did you stay so calm?
I smiled.
Because anger burns wood faster than fire. And when the smoke clears, there's nothing left to build with.
He didn't understand then.
But maybe one day he will. I often visit the workshop even now. I sit by the same window where sunlight filters through the dust and hits the old workbench. I close my eyes and listen to the sound of saws and laughter. The heartbeat of a business that survived betrayal, greed, and time. It reminds me that peace isn't the absence of pain. It's the understanding that pain has served its purpose. When people ask me about revenge, I tell them this. It's not about getting even. It's about getting better, quietly, patiently, and without malice. And maybe that's the greatest victory of all. One Sunday evening, I found myself at the lake behind our old home. The sun was setting, painting the water gold. Linda sat beside me, her hand resting lightly on mine. The girls and their families were gathered behind us, laughing, grilling, talking. I took a deep breath, the kind that fills your chest with both ache and gratitude. Linda leaned closer. You did it, she said softly. You brought it all back. I smiled faintly. No, I whispered, time did. I just waited long enough to see it happen. We sat there in silence, watching the light fade over the water. And in that moment, I realized, revenge hadn't given me peace.
Patience had.
Because sometimes, silence is the loudest answer. And sometimes, silence is the best revenge.